Welcome to the Gentleman's Guide to Gaming, and a special video, because way back when, over 10 years ago, God help us, I created a video which was, I think, the worst RPG I've ever played, and I really demolished this game. I spoke about a Shadowrun game I had been playing in, where my character had been consigned to a toilet cubicle for a good hour of gameplay, shitting himself. And it was in no way Shadowrun. It was based on the movie Cobra, starring Sylvester Stallone. I think it was called Cobra. But anyway, it was awful. And I realised something the other day. I never made a video on the worst RPG I ever ran. And how's that fair? You know, I'm quite happy to tear down someone else's game and say it was awful, but I have never explained a game that I ran that was terrible. Now, I'll say up front, this game, and there's some hard choices to make here, because I've ran some real stinkers. I've not ran many games that I have had to abort partway through, but there's been plenty where I probably should have. And these games are largely from a long time ago, because I think I found my groove with role-playing. I don't think I could ever run a truly awful session now, because I just tend to play to what the players want, which is generally the trick of running a game that people like. But I had to rack my brain and think, okay, what is the worst game I've ever run? Because I've ran some real bad games, and the ones that really come to mind for me, I have ran a terrible game of Dungeons and Dragons, and this game was absolutely abominable. It was absolutely abominable, and it wasn't the player's fault. It was because I was going in with a bad mood, a pre-existing terrible mood. I didn't like one of the players anymore. I'd fallen out with them, and I was bored of the plot. I had no fresh ideas, and they were partway through an adventure. I didn't know what to do next with them, and I basically just trapped them in a dungeon and more or less killed them slowly over the course of 3 hours. And while I'm smiling about that, I'm not proud of it. You know, I was probably about 18 or 19 years old. I was young, stupid, petty. I wasn't emotionally mature enough to handle my waves of emotion back then. I apologise to the players involved if any of you should be watching this right now. I doubt it. I imagine all of you wanted to make a pretty wide distance between you and me after then. There's also a Vampire the Masquerade game, or Vampire the Dark Ages game I ran, which was the very first Vampire the Dark Ages game I ran, and I threw so many gimmicky things, snowflakey things. I know I like snowflakes in games. I love the bloodlines in most of the bloodlines in Vampire, the True Brew Harken. And Daughters of Cacophony as well. But this was a Dark Ages game where there were gargoyles all over the damn place. There was salubri here, there, and everywhere. And I ended up adapting that chronicle to actually become a decent one. Oddly, it was like me. This was me finding my feet with Vampire. The very first Vampire Dark Ages game I ran was just miserable for the players, because they had so much information that they had to digest, so many characters they had to interact with, and no real plot to speak of. Or rather, the plot that I was running was an incredibly simple: you are being hunted by the Tremere, you have a salubri under your protection, gargoyles are coming for you, get them to the next town. Now, on the face of it, that might not actually sound like a bad plot, but I promise you, the way I ran it was absolutely terrible. And I have rerun that story in much better ways since then, but that isn't the worst. The next one up would be Godlike. Godlike is a game I absolutely adore and not enough people play. It's a Second World War superhero role-playing game where characters can be very squishy and killed very easily. But I absolutely love the writing of Godlike. It still ranks as one of my favourite games, even though I haven't ran it in so long. But I had the bad misfortune, you could say, of running for a real military enthusiast who are in fact a table full of military enthusiasts. And I thought this would be a good idea because they had become invested in the plot for Godlike as they were fighting on the Western Front. It was the Battle of the Ardennes and so on. And no, it wasn't enjoyable at all because they were so enthusiastic about the militaria aspect. Whenever I got a detail wrong, because they were always asking for details, I was basically... At first, I was trying to make it up, and then they were calling out when I got it wrong. And then when I started, I realized I didn't have the answers. I just started apologizing a lot. Like when you're new in customer service or your first call handling and you just keep apologizing to the person, you don't know how to answer them. And that just digs you deeper and deeper into a hole and makes them lose faith in you. Because people often see apology as admission of guilt or a way in to continue the attack. And this was a case where, unlike the D&D one where I was a problem, unlike the Vampire the Dark Ages one where the plot was a problem, this was one where the players were a problem. They may well have worked in a game of Godlike where the GM was au fait with every aspect, what caliber of rifle was being used on this battlefield at this time, and so on, but for me, the game fell apart. And there was one player who just who was insistent. This one roll engine system is terrible. I am going to prove it. And so rather than playing in the entire session, he created a bell curve. He was basically just sat there rolling dice, trying to determine on various dice pools how likely he would be to succeed or failure. And at the end of 3 hours, because this session, as I say, I very rarely have ever aborted a session, other than for things like ill health, he flourished his piece of paper and said, "Look." Look how unlikely it is you're going to succeed when you got this many dice and this few dice and so on. And yeah, in the end, I remember sending him a very angry text message, but it destroyed my confidence. And again, this was when I was very young. But the worst game I ever ran was one of All Flesh Must Be Eaten. And this was a perfect confluence of me being the problem, the players being the problem, the system being unsuitable for the story I wanted to tell. So, hands up, I like All Flesh Must Be Eaten. I still think it's an excellent zombie RPG. I don't own it anymore. I sold it a long time ago, but I can still remember it pretty damn clearly. You know, it's 3d6, I think. I might get that wrong. It's a d6 based system, and you're just trying to beat certain difficulty thresholds with your dice. It's pretty easy, pretty swingy to learn. Or rather, it's a pretty swingy system, but it's easy to learn. I was massively into the Resident Evil video game series to the degree that I had designed the Arclay Mansion, or Spencer Mansion as I think it became known, from Resident Evil 1 to be architecturally sound, because in the video games the floors don't exactly line up. So I spent time in MS Paint recreating the maps from Resident Evil 1. I was very particular. This was before I had broad access to the internet or anything like this. This is a long time ago. And so I was taking these images from the video game. You know, I had the video game up on the TV screen and I was copying these things down. And then I was layering them on top of each other. And I was adding things like bathrooms and kitchens and things like that, because the Arclay Mansion is utterly unlivable, other than the fact that there's zombies and dogs or Cerberus running around in them, and hunters and Crimson Heads later on. But anyway, I was very particular. I wanted this Resident Evil 1 themed All Flesh Must Be Eaten game to go perfectly. So what's more, I made sure all of the doors, I had maps for myself and maps for the players. I knew which doors needed armor key, which doors needed night key, which needed a helm key, or whatever the fuck it was, and all of that stuff. I ensured that their characters, they were all, of course, members of STARS, and which, if I still think it's fucking ridiculous that there's a special tactics and rescue service for the tiny city of Raccoon, but, we'll live with it. How many people really go missing in those woods? But I'm guessing a lot of people need rescuing from Raccoon City. Well, they certainly do by the time Resident Evil starts. Anyway, they were all members of STARS. I had designed character sheets for all of the Bravo team and Alpha team members. I thought I'm not going to cleave to Resident Evil's plot too tightly. They might be able to get to certain places and rescue members of Bravo team in time. I made the mistake early on of allowing the game to start back at the RPD so we could introduce the characters in the police department and introduce their relationships with Bravo team and Chief Irons, who shows up in Resident Evil 2. And when Bravo team calls in their distress call after investigating the Arklay Mansion incident, or their helicopter goes down, in fact they don't broadcast a distress call, they just go radio silent, Alpha Team heads off. Now, in the video game, for whatever reason, Alpha Team heads off utterly unprepared. Maybe all their weapons and ammunition have been kept in the helicopter that Brad flies off in. Let's say that. So it means when you start the game, you have a handgun and maybe you have a clip and a combat knife, and that's about it. No shotguns, no magnums. Some of the supporting characters have that. The reason this was a mistake to not do it exactly like the video game was because when they decided they'd go out, the players insisted, well, we're going to tool up. We're going to tie, wrap bandoliers around ourselves, go with grenade launchers, all this kind of shit. So they went into Resident Evil in God mode. And I tried to finagle my way into making them lose some of their equipment, and they lost some of it, but not all of it, when Brad took off in the helicopter. So that was problem one. They went into a zombie survival horror game too well armed. The problem with them being too well armed is they decided they would hold their ground in the field. After Joseph gets attacked in the opening sequence of Resident Evil, the squad gets attacked by Cerberus zombie dogs. Well, they were well armed enough to see some of those zombie dogs off and basically walk up to Arklay Mansion rather than running there in haste. And so, because I didn't want to just keep hitting them wave after wave of dog to impress upon them the urgency. So they get to Arklay Mansion. By the way, none of these players have played Resident Evil before. I was running for a group of people probably 10, 20 years older than me. And back in the late 90s when I did this, you still didn't see all that many 40-year-olds or 30 or 40-year-olds playing PlayStation games quite as much as you do now. Video games these days are ubiquitous. Back then, not so much. So they got into the Arklay Mansion. They locked the door behind them because dogs can work locks. And Albert Wesker, who any fan of Resident Evil will know, is their captain. He's got his sunglasses on. And he says, no, don't open that door, or words to that effect. And one of the players points his gun at Albert Wesker at this point and says, I've not trusted you ever since you told us to get on the helicopter and not arm ourselves properly, which I had tried to do. As I said, I tried to finagle. And Wesker said, we were in a hurry. We needed to get out here and find out what happened to the Bravo team. Get your act back in the game. And then the player said, why are you wearing those sunglasses all the time anyway? It's almost as if you have something to hide. And again, they haven't played Resident Evil. They're just picking up on what is effectively an anime trope that appears in Resident Evil. Albert Wesker is cool. He wears sunglasses. He's also evil, which is why he wears sunglasses. In later games, it's because he's got red and yellow eyes, but not in Resident Evil 1. What are you talking about, officer? Get your gun out of my face. Wesker draws his gun, at which point the player says, okay, I'm going to shoot him. And then rolls what is effectively a critical hit and kills Albert Wesker in the opening Resident Evil 1 Arklay Mansion scene. Yeah. Now, that wasn't going to be the end of it, because Wesker could have come back easily, given he injects himself with all kinds of things later on in the video games, but immediately there was mutiny, and the captain was dead. Thankfully, the rest of the squad decided, well, even with Wesker dead, we are going to try and track down the rest of Bravo team, who have gone missing somewhere in this mansion. And so they start making their way through Bravo, through Arklay Mansion, solving some of the puzzles. They go off well, occasionally encountering zombies, and because of the system and all flesh must be eaten, there is absolutely nothing stopping them from pause, 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 which is aim, 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 fire, headshot, kills zombie in one hit. So no tension whatsoever in the zombies. I really should have upped the number of zombies they were going up against or had them coming in from different directions, but I was pretty new to role-playing and running games at the time, so yeah, I did not do that. I just set it out basically like the video game. And it turns out if in the video game every single shot you make is a headshot, your ammo goes quite a long way. Then they started getting to the puzzle doors. Oh, I can't get into this room. There's a lock with a symbol of an armor key, and a suit of armor on it. So one of the players said, okay, well, I'll blow the lock open. I've got a shotgun. Bam! I thought, fuck. You can't do that in the video game. It's all painted backgrounds. You interact with them with the right key and it opens. Otherwise, yeah, you can't. It's not a fully destructive environment. So I said, you blow the lock panel open, and to your surprise, it's electrical. This isn't just some keyhole. And at this point, they're tapping on the doors. Aha! And I say, this is a security door. It's made up to look like a wooden door. But in fact, donk, donk, it's metal, it's reinforced. Maybe this mansion isn't a mansion after all. And I was thinking, I'm getting this back. This is working out now. So, of course, one of the characters is a tech. Okay, I'm going to override it. Rolls critical success. Managed to get the door open early in the game. And so they managed to get the thing I'd put behind that door because I wasn't good enough to think on my feet back then. And with all of this going on, the zombies weren't a threat. It didn't feel horrific. They were getting past the puzzles with brute force because you're not playing it like the video game. Albert Wesker is dead. The thing is, at the end of the session, the players all loved it. There was only one, I say all of them, all but one. One of the players at the start of the game, interestingly one of the military nuts from the Godlike game, kept asking, where is Raccoon City exactly? And I was saying, oh, it's in like the northwest of America. What was that? Oregon? One of the Dakotas? Washington State? And I said, oh, it's in Washington State. It's in all the forests in Washington State. Okay, how far from Seattle are we? I don't fucking know how far away from Seattle Raccoon City is, so I made up, it's 200 miles away from Seattle. Okay, well, in that case, before we take off in the helicopter, I'm going to radio stars in Seattle so they can send some backup to us, because this is very odd. And there was absolutely no reason for me to tell them not to, other than this could break the plot. Because, yeah, if Seattle are sending backup to this mansion, at some point you're going to get the army involved. And that was his operating principle. His idea was, if we can't handle this, let's send the military in. Which, let's be honest, if the military came in to deal with the Resident Evil incident, it would have been dealt with probably a lot quicker. And with a lot less tension, because they could just nuke the house, which ironically is what happens at the end anyway. And so at the end of it, this guy said to me, I never really got a sense of place. I never really felt where we were. And I'm not really sure there was a sense of threat. So I don't suppose you could change that for the second session. Oh, yeah, of course, I'll do that. And after the game, I just felt absolutely awful. I didn't run it again. I didn't come back for a second session. I just thought, I have utterly botched this. And there was a lesson to learn here. One, it's that video game to RPG adaptations don't necessarily work face value. You have to do a little more work than I did. But the other was, I was very new to GMing and I was letting the players push me around effectively. If they wanted something, I didn't question it. I just gave it to them. And I think you should allow players to play the game they want to play, but at the same time you need to make it interesting. You need to put challenges in the way. You need to give them the possibility of failure. Was there a way of me getting around the critical failures of killing Wesker and breaking open security locked doors in this game? I don't know. I would have had to have thought about that a little more. Again, Wesker could have come back, but what I would have done, had I thought of it at the time, I suppose, what I should have done is I should have switched around the contents of these locked rooms so that they weren't able to basically skip to the Plant 42 section of Resident Evil 1 before they'd even explored the entire east wing of the mansion. So, all of that said, that is the worst game I have ever run. I am sure you have all played in far worse sounding games than that. I know I have. And I'm sure some of you have ran worse games than that. But my experience of that, I can smile about it now, but for a long time, that was a weight I carried, a constant thorn in my confidence, making me think, I can't do this. I can't run a game because I can't improvise. And now that's basically all I do. So if you want to know about a game that isn't bad, I have been running Curseborn, not only for Red Moon role-playing, but also for a group of fantastic players, and the footage is going to end up on this channel, as well as the Onyx Path channel, so do check that out, and I can tell you that is nowhere near as bad as the All Flesh Must Be Eaten game I ran. And if you're interested in Curseborn, which is Onyx Path's new urban horror role-playing game, do click on the Kickstarter link below so you can get notified when the campaign goes live. Thank you very much for watching.